Hello, Cubs fans, and welcome back to another video. I wish I was coming to you with better news, but when it rains, it pours here in Chicago. Especially, that's a joke, but also, man, is it true? But we have some bad news here when it comes to our players. We have lost two players to one to another team and one to free agency. I'll talk about the first to another team. Andrew Kittredge is on the way back to Baltimore after just one season with the Chicago Cubs. He is going back to the team he was just with, the Baltimore Orioles, which is really interesting. It was a trade just with money, and that's his choice at the end of the day. I think that's going to cause a lot of issues, and we'll go over that in a second. The other thing I wanted to quickly talk about, and it's kind of the bigger story here, is our boy, the person that we've been talking about since he landed from Japan, Shota Imanaga, has entered free agency and is no longer a starting pitcher for the Chicago Cubs. So let's talk about that first, Brandon. This is big news.
Yeah, this is kind of like Ethan's worst nightmare video. But yeah, I mean, obviously, Kittredge is he was a really good reliever for the most part down the stretch for the Cubs. A little surprised that after they got him at the trade deadline, they just sort of have forsaken that extra year of team control that seemed pretty valuable when they got him and just send him back to the Orioles for money. Uh, that's pretty frustrating. Obviously, the Shota Imanaga news is a little bit more complex. It's just, again, there's a lot to say from both sides. His contract was very complex, but basically, the mechanics of it were that the Cubs had a 3-year, $57 million team option to exercise on Imanaga. They declined that, which then passed the baton off to Imanaga, who had a 1-year, $15 million player option, which he declined, and that has now led to him effectively being a free agent. The Cubs could still attach the qualifying offer to him. I'm skeptical about the possibility of that. Maybe the Cubs will. Obviously, I think they would have rather just, had him at, what was a relatively cheap contract for a good starting pitcher. But again, we'll see what happens on that front. But yeah, I mean, th these are two cost-saving maneuvers for a team that just had its best season in 5 years. And, again, you can say what you want. Obviously, Kittredge is an older reliever. He had his, ups and downs. Shota Imanaga, obviously, towards the end of the season was really struggling, especially with home runs. I mean, these were not infallible players, but I mean, for the for the contracts that they had, for the quality of production that that they had given the Cubs, I have to say I'm a little surprised that it feels like the Cubs are almost punting on 2026. It just again that hasn't happened yet, but it feels like that's the way it's going.
Yeah, it's a really weird time to just cover Kittredge really quickly. I mean, look, most people know by now that I'm an Orioles fan at heart, and then I love the Cubs as well. But from a Baltimore Orioles standpoint, I think many people are happy that Andrew Kittredge is headed back to Camden Yards for a multitude of reasons. One, that the Orioles had a terrible season and take what they can get at this point. But from a Cubs perspective, it really is a head scratcher of why would you get, yeah, he's an older player, but he's still, like you said, did very good this season. Our bullpen has been all over the place for the past few years. So shaking it up at all is really a head scratcher. And then there's the problem of Shota Imanaga. Him next to Matthew Boyd, there was only, really those two that really could do some damage. And yeah, Shota wasn't like the most amazing pitcher during the world's, during the playoffs, but he was still better than some other pitchers that really like, poop the bed. And excuse my French for that. But, now that Shota is in theory gone, unless the Cubs pick him up again, Matthew Boyd, I think, is going to really be the person that we turn to. Yeah, we have Jamison Tyone and Kate Horton, and in theory, then there goes Javier Assad and maybe Ben Brown, but these are all maybes at this point. I mean, all eyes were on Shota Imanaga after Matthew Boyd. So I think that a lot of restructuring is going to happen during spring training. But to me, this is a huge head scratcher at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'd say, I've been sort of like, pointing this out on these videos for the last year or so, especially at the trade deadline when the Cubs really didn't do a ton. But th today has proven the Cubs are terrified of the lockout. I mean, they are really genuinely terrified of what's going to happen in 2027 when the current competitive balance agreement expires, and there's expected to be a very long, very arduous lockout, and the sport, the parameters of the economics of the sport are expected to change pretty significantly. The Cubs are clearing the books. for the long term and for the short term. Again, if you're paying attention, you know that a lot of this team, Nico Horner, Ian Happ, Jamison Tyone, Carson Kelly, even more guys, they're due to be free agents after next year. A lot of the Cubs' money is coming off the books within the next 12 months, and including now Imanaga and Kittredge. And so it's just like, man, I just it feels weird because like, again, the Cubs did that little rebuild for a couple years and then they got back into contention this year. And obviously it's not, losing Imanaga and Kittredge isn't to say that they can't, continue to compete next year, but it's like the Dodgers are elite. The Brewers beat the Brewers in a, not a rebuilding year, but in a year where, a transition year for them, crushed the Cubs. Obviously the NLDS was super close, but they took the division as well. And you'd think that the Cubs would want to just add and add and add to make sure that they were in the best possible position for 2026. And, unless you really firmly believe that this front office, which has never done this, by the way, but this front office is going to reinvest these savings into better players in free agency and trades, I, as a Cubs fan, I don't know what else to say. I think that it feels like this team is just terrified of what's to come in that lockout, and I think they're gonna, be bad. I think they're gonna be bad in 2026 because of it.
I think a parting thought I'd like to put is this is not only the Cubs making
Mhm.
decisions like this. This is the MLB, not the MLB, but this is every MLB team as a whole kind of preparing for 2027. And we've covered this on many different sites. We've covered it on Northside Baseball before. The lockout is coming at the end of the day. Armageddon is almost here, folks. Um, it is an absolute shame if at the end of the day, Shota has gone into free agency and we don't pick him up again. He has been, since Brandon and I have started making these videos, he was one of the first players that we covered. He's one of our favorite Cubs players, and I think he will go down in Cubs history for us at least as one of the best pitchers that we got out of Japan. So, maybe next to Shohei Ohtani, but at least for the Cubs, one of the
Yeah.
best pitchers. So I think the underlying thing here is that 2027 is going to obviously cause a lot of problems. But it's not just the Cubs making these decisions, and
Yeah.
I think that we have to think about that. But you know, we'll have to just see what 2026 looks like. We might pick up some better pitchers, but RIP to our boy Shota Imanaga. Goodbye, Andrew Kittredge. Good luck in Baltimore. I'll see you real soon. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this, guys. How are you feeling? We can only imagine. Leave your comments in the comment section below.